Later on in the week, when the Lions come to Baltimore, we'll be on the scene for all things football all week in Owings Mills. You can follow Luke, of course, at WNST and Baltimore Luke for updates from Owings Mills. Meanwhile, we'll be banging around Camden Yards and watching Yankee Stadium and watching this pennant race come together. So many teams. Here come the Royals and the Tigers and the Astros and the Mariners and the Orioles starting to drop a little bit, but still very much in it. I love some good writing, and I love some good baseball nerdity. This guy is good for all of that and more. He's a great follow out on Twitter. From Grantland over now to Ringer, he has Ben Lindbergh. You can follow him on Twitter at Ben Lindbergh. That's LINDBERGH. He certainly is wound up on the feed of many Orioles fans as he is semi-politicked for Zach Britton as Cy Young winner. We welcome him onto the program. I've been looking forward to having this guy on for the first time. It is his virgin appearance here at WNST. We welcome Ben Lindbergh from Ringer on. What's going on, man? You must have been bored last week to be writing this Britain for Cy Young thing, but this is part of the eternal baseball award debate. Welcome aboard, my man.
Hey, good to be here. Yeah, we were, we were stirring things up a little bit. We were talking about Britain not just for Cy Young, but even for MVP, not even advocating for it so much, but just kind of making the case, how one would make the case if one were to want to make that case.
Well, and it's a case to be made, I guess, for any Raleigh Fingers, any Dennis Eckersley, any Bruce Sutter, any Mariano Rivera, anyone that's been dominant. One of the problems we've had here recently is just getting him to the mound in the ninth inning with a lead, right?
Right.
Well, that's it's its own issue. Then he has to do what he does, which is hopefully go 3 and out, save another game. But it's hard to make a case that all of those things have to work right, kind of like wide receiver in football. A lot of things have to go right for that guy to even touch the football. But when he does, it's a beautiful thing. Make your case for Zach Britton as Cy Young or MVP, Ben Lindbergh.
Well, I think it really comes down to how you look at these awards and what you're looking for in an MVP award winner, how you define the value in valuable. If you're just talking about who's the best player, and personally, I kind of lean toward giving those awards to purely the best player. That's my philosophy on awards. But a lot of people consider context, and they wouldn't give the award to, say, Mike Trout, who's probably the best player in baseball, because his teammates aren't very good. And so he's not going to make the playoffs. And in a sense, the value he offered wasn't actually all that valuable because it didn't make the difference between making the playoffs and not. So if that's how you define it, this was just sort of taking that point of view a little bit farther and saying, okay, well, if you are going to consider context, then you should really consider all the context. So you should care not only how a player did and not only if he's playing for a winning team or not, but when in those games did he make his contributions? Was he clutch? Clutch may not be a skill. It may not be something you can repeat, but it still has value in the moment. So did a player perform at the most important times? Did he perform against the most important teams? If you have a good game against a division rival you're battling in the pennant race, then that helps your team. That's more valuable than an interleague game, for instance. And the pennant race matters. Where you are in the standings matters. And because the Orioles have been kind of clinging to their spot for the past couple months without really more than a couple games separating them from the closest team, every game has been extremely important for them. And so, even though Britain is often only going one inning at a time, those innings are very important. And the fact that they've managed to stay as in the race as they have this long, despite, as you mentioned, a very weak starting rotation, I think does speak to his value. So, yes, it's a very context-sensitive argument. If you put some other dominant closer on the Orioles this year, maybe he'd have just as good a case as Britton, although Britton has been fantastic. But it really just comes down to who made the most difference, who made his team more likely to make the playoffs and therefore win the World Series this year. And because of his circumstances, Zach Britton is close to the top of that list.
Well, I know your colleague Michael Ballman kind of brought this whole thing up to start with a couple of weeks ago. And in the era of Twitter, Orioles fans are looking for, sort of good breakdowns and good news, certainly at a time when there hasn't been a whole lot of good news on the field. It's fascinating with Britton because let's say his ERA is 0.47, which would be unconscionable. Let's say he doesn't blow any games and finishes with 67 saves, and the Orioles make the wild card by a game. It really would be a thought that if he would have blown one or two, they wouldn't even be a playoff team. And certainly you can make that case right about now as they sort of teeter on the brink with 4 or 5 teams looking to be closing in on playing somewhere in that magic 530, 540, 550 area that looks like it's going to be, there are going to be a couple of teams get their feelings hurt here and going to get left out by a game or two if this continues.
Right, exactly. And for my article, I used a stat called championship win probability added. And if people are interested in the details, they can go dig into it in the article. But
by the way, I've never heard of such a thing, so you need to define that before we go any further.
Right. So championship win probability added, it's a long name, but it is what it sounds like. It's how much more likely did you make your team winning the championship, which primarily comes down to how much more likely did you make your team to make the playoffs? Because, once you get to the playoffs, who knows what will happen. And you can say that Britain really made the Orioles more likely to make the playoffs, regardless of whether they actually end up making it or not. His contributions still matter. He has still done what he's done. He's having one of the best relief seasons we've seen in some time. He's having, the highest ground ball rate ever, I think breaking his own record, and not blowing a save if you care about the save stat, but just purely not allowing any runs, despite throwing his two-seamer about 90% of the time. It's really an incredible performance. And so it's purely a retrospective thing. Would the Orioles trade Zach Britton for Mike Trout if they could, or Mookie Betts if they could, or Jose Altuve if they could, the other MVP candidates in the league, or Josh Donaldson for that matter? Of course they would. They would want to have the full-time MVP quality position player. But because Britton has been in this particular spot this year, you can make the case that he has been the most valuable, because it really could come down to the Orioles making the playoffs or not making the playoffs by one game. And, when you're the guy who's on the mound in the ninth inning in those very close games, and allowing a run can be the difference between blowing a game or not, that the Orioles can't afford to blow. Because of those unique circumstances this year, Britton has both been placed in a situation where he really can impact the playoff race, and he's performed as well as anyone could have expected.
Enjoying our Virgin Voyage with Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. You can follow his journey out on Twitter as well at Ben Lindbergh, Lindbergh. Also the author of The Only Rule is It Has to Work, our wild experiment building a new kind of baseball team. Before I get into the Orioles and this year and the race, just in general, tell me about the book you've inked here with Sam Miller. You tend to take a little different look at baseball than I think others do, Ben.
Yeah, we tend to take a more statistical approach to the game, trying to look for objective things we can learn about baseball. And both Sam and I have been at Baseball Prospectus, which is a website where a lot of analysts who now work for teams started out writing about baseball. And so that's kind of the way that we look at the game, the lens through which we view it. And we wanted to get our hands dirty. We wanted to get in the trenches, because it's easy for us to sort of sit at our computers and look at a spreadsheet and say so-and-so should do this, such and such a thing, but without actually being there, without being in the clubhouse, without having to make those decisions and, look the players in the eye, it's a lot easier. And so Sam and I convinced an independent league baseball team, so that's a team that's not in the affiliated minor league system, but does have professional players who are paid to play baseball, many of whom have been in the minor leagues or will be in the minor leagues. We took over this team, the Sonoma Stompers, which play in a league called the Pacific Association out in California, and we essentially made all of the baseball decisions for that team last summer. So we signed players, we were in the clubhouse and the dugout every day, and we were just trying to innovate a little, trying to experiment a little, see what ideas we had worked and what didn't when you were actually faced with real people who'd been in the game their whole lives. So we learned a lot from the experience, and I think the story turned into not just a story about baseball and stats, but also kind of about relationships between people and how you manage people and how you present yourself, because we didn't want to come in and be dictators and tyrants and act like we knew everything. We wanted to come to a consensus, but it wasn't always easy.
Ben, what do you love about baseball at this point? I see all the advanced statistics, and like I fight with Luke about this. Luke covers the team for us, and I know it's what all the kids are doing these days, and I know it's how Theo is running, teams, and how the Dodgers are being run, and how Joe Madden's running things. And then there's Dusty Baker that eschews some of this. It's sort of the old line baseball guys that would eschew, part of the statistical breakdown. I've been looking at the back of bubblegum cards and perusing stats as a media member. Situational, all the sort of breakdowns through the course of time. I do find some of it to be kind of exhausting, to be honest with you, with WAR and, the general next version of stats that are being used in the game. I don't know that it's for everyone. I think some of it's fascinating to me. Some of it's kind of overkill and takes a little bit of the fun out of it. What makes it fun for you being a stat guy, but also a guy that loves watching a game?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't have to be for everyone, certainly. And it is the way that teams are running, front offices these days and putting their rosters together. But that doesn't mean that the fan watching at home has to be digging into all these numbers. And one of the conclusions Sam and I came to, I think it's actually a line in the book, is that there's no one way to love baseball. You can come to the game however you'd like. And even those of us like me and Sam who sort of, really are intrigued by the stat stuff and like digging into it, we started watching baseball the way that anyone else does. We played as kids. We were fans of a team. Eventually, we started digging into the stats, but not everyone, gets to that point, and that's perfectly okay. I think for people who do, there are certain people who say sort of what you just said, it can sap some of the fun out of the game. You're thinking about the numbers instead of just appreciating the aesthetic appeal of the game going on in front of you. I think for those of us who really look into this stuff, though, it comes from a place of love about the game. We like baseball so much and we spend so much time studying it that we just sort of want to understand it as well as we can. And, there are things that are hard to pick up on when you're just watching the game. Even if you've been watching the game your whole life, it's very easy to miss things because it's such a complex game. And so the stats sort of help you come to a greater understanding of at least some aspects of the game, I think. And for those of us who are inclined that way for whatever reason, we really find it pretty intoxicating to just keep digging deeper and deeper and see what we might have missed.
He is Ben Lindbergh. The book is The Only Rule Is It Has to Work, Our Wild Experiment Building a New Kind of Baseball Team. You can check out his book. Check him out at Ringer. He writes about things that are even, less nerdy than this and about the real world sometimes. Ben gets involved in that. He's also Ben Lindbergh, Bergh, on Twitter. All right, let's get into this pennant race and just onto the field and onto how many teams. You love statistical probabilities. 3 teams in one race in the American League East. Haven't seen this in a while. And certainly from an Orioles perspective, this is the first real juicy, gritty pennant race we've had around here. I've been on the air 25 years in Baltimore, Ben. In December, we haven't had a pennant race really like this. We've been way ahead. We've been kind of coming and being the trail horse a little bit, but 3 teams vying for, one sort of bye in the American League East. This is going to be a juicy couple of weeks coming up, I think, with Toronto and Boston, because there's no real evidence that anybody is going to inch ahead and be 6 or 7 games ahead by the middle of September.
Yeah, it's been a fun race so far. I think we entered the season thinking that the AL East was pretty much a toss-up. On opening day, I wouldn't have ruled any of the teams out of contention, really. And, even the Yankees have managed to hang in there longer than anyone would have thought. So it's been a fun race. I think it'll continue to be a fun race. Of course, the people who look at the stats and make the projection systems and try to weigh the probabilities have been sort of, forecasting doom for the Orioles all year, really, since before the season started, and that's probably nothing new to Orioles fans. This is not the first year that the stats have said something pessimistic about the Orioles, and the team has managed to defy that, whether because of a good bullpen or because of Buck Showalter. That has a lot going for it. They hit a ton of home runs. They've got some good relievers, headlined by Britton, but that rotation is shaky, and everyone knew it would be coming in. But if the Orioles manage to pull this out, they'll definitely have done it with one of the weakest rotations we've seen in some time for a playoff contender.
We call it beer league softball, and I've said there's a reason somebody didn't put Gorman Thomas and Dave Kingman all in the same sort of lineup together. This is a unique blend of feast or famine, and I know it's been written about from a stats perspective as the slowest team in the history of baseball as well.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think probably on the whole, the stat heads have always embraced the sort of power and strikeout sort of slow players scoring a lot of runs model more so than maybe the old school fan does. And based on what I've seen and the research I've done, that really won't hold them back in October if they manage to make it. I know that a lot of people wonder whether that approach works in the playoffs. If you score all your runs on home runs, can you continue to score in October? And I've actually found that, yes, not only can you continue to score, but often the teams that rely on the home run actually survive the transition to October even better than teams that kind of put the ball in play and, go station to station, despite the success of the Royals over the last few years, which, certainly both approaches can work. I think the virtue of the all or nothing approach is that in October, you're facing really good defenses. And so you put the ball in play, it's less likely to result in a hit. You're less likely against good pitchers to string several singles together. So if you can be the team that just pokes one out, then I think you're in pretty good shape. So if the Orioles do manage to make it, of course, the rotation will still be a thorn in their side. But if they manage to make it, I don't think they'd be less equipped to win.
Ben Lindbergh, are you telling me good hitting beats good pitching?
I think they both beat each other. I'm not sure I'd come down on either side of that debate. I think good pitchers are worse against good hitters, and good hitters are worse against good pitchers, and that's the way it works.
For you with the Cubs, I was out at Wrigley Field the last 3 days. I was out there with Edward Vedder and some friends and having some fun. And I can't begin to, I've flown into this, and I lived in Chicago on and off at the turn of the century, and I've seen pressures in Boston. Hell, I'm married to a Red Sox fan. When I married her, they didn't know what a World Series was. 13 years later, they got 3 parades, and she's making fun of me being an Orioles fan. And I remember we used to make fun of Red Sox fans. The Cubs thing this year, I just feel there's incredible pressure, and I have used this, and I will continue to use this for the next 6 weeks on any Cubs fan. You better win game one. No matter what, they better win game one.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of expectations because they have deserved the expectations. They've really been the best team in baseball this year, often just, going by regular old record, but certainly by the underlying performance. They've been extremely strong. They've just outscored all comers more so than any other team. And yeah, I mean, sure, you have to worry about the pressure. My default opinion about pressure in the major leagues is generally just that, all of these guys got here by being really, really good at dealing with pressure. There's a lot of pressure in every at-bat, every game, working your way up through the minor leagues, getting to the major leagues. If you are the type who's going to crack under pressure, you're probably not even going to make it that far because it's really, really competitive. Now, there's a little more pressure certainly in October than there is in the regular season. I understand that. But I think most people who have made it to Major League Baseball are well equipped to handle that. And, this team made the playoffs last year, so they're not new. Although, again, stats would show that players who haven't been in the playoffs before do just as well as players who have been in the playoffs before. So I tend to think that good teams will be good teams. And in the playoffs, of course, anything can happen. There's a lot of variance and randomness. And, you've got wild card games and 5-game series and 7-game series. And obviously the inferior team can win a short series at any time. But I'd still bet on the best team. And, right now I think the Cubs have shown that they're probably the best team.
Boy, National League changed. I mean, it looked like it was just 4 teams and nobody else. And now all of a sudden, here comes Miami. Here comes St. Louis. San Francisco sort of fading back to the pack a little bit. There's going to be a race in the National League where it didn't feel that way the All-Star break and certainly over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, certainly for the wild card, certainly for the NL West title. That seems like it's going to come down to the wire, which is nice because last season was such an unpredictable year. I mean, based on all the preseason expectations, whether you were looking at a projection system or you were just going by your gut, those standings at the end of last season really were almost the reverse in some divisions of what people expected them to be. And this year's been a little bit different. The Orioles are certainly defying expectations, probably the biggest surprise team of the year. But for the most part, the teams that we thought would be good have been good, and the teams that we thought had been bad would be bad. There are some teams that clearly weren't really contending this year and had traded a lot of their veterans and we're kind of looking toward the future. And mostly that's how it's played out. But it is nice that we are still getting some pennant races here, even though a lot of the teams at the top and at the bottom were pretty predictable. It's still going to come down to the wire.
And then there's teams like Kansas City and Houston that have been really good and really bad, at various points during the year.
Right, yeah. The Astros started so slow. They had a really rough patch at the beginning of April, and since then they've basically been what everyone expected the Astros to be. But that early run might have killed them because, they're in a division with a couple other good teams. So if you could retroactively go back and have them play like the Astros all year instead of starting that slow, then maybe they'd be in the playoffs. But as it is, the odds are certainly against them. And, the Royals have just dealt with a lot of injury issues. And this recent winning run they've been on maybe has something to do with the fact that they've got a healthy Lorenzo Cain back and a healthy Alex Gordon back. But I am not sure that they got those guys back in time.
He is Ben Lindbergh, staffer at Ringer. You can follow him there as well as on Twitter at Ben Lindbergh. That's Bergh. The book is The Only Rule Is It Has to Work. You can find that very easily out on the internet, anywhere books are sold. Talk to me about The Ringer. I'll leave you with this because I know you've had some upheaval. You're a young journalist. I was once a young journalist. Now I'm a semi-young journalist. I'm young when I shave, Ben. But, for you to bounce around in this new era of digital and where Bill Simmons has been and where he's going. This has been kind of a wild ride for you, too, in doing what you want to do.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a topsy-turvy process, but, I think it's worked out fairly well for me. I've gotten to work exclusively at places where I wanted to work. I really liked being at Grantland. When Grantland shut down, everyone was sorry to see it go, but I was able to then go work for 538, which is also a really good site, and now I'm back with most of the Grantland crew, my old editor and Bill Simmons, of course, at the Ringer. So, I've been lucky. I've been able to work for a bunch of places with great editors who kind of just let their writers do their own thing. And for people who liked Grantland, I think there's a lot to like at the Ringer, too. And there's even some stuff that you might not have seen at Grantland. So
there was a four-letter network involved there that, certainly had a little bit of oversight. I'm sort of famous for outing these large media organizations for the fraudulence that they represent. So, I fall on that side of being a rogue, Hunter S. Thompson-inspired journalist myself, Ben.
Yeah, well, being at ESPN, it has its advantages and had some disadvantages, too. I don't know whether a site like Grantland would have gotten off the ground without the deep pockets of ESPN, but at a different company, it might have lasted longer than it did once it was established. So definitely pluses and minuses.
Or Young Frankenstein, as I'm sure it was called in Bristol at some point, right?
I wouldn't know, but sure.
Freedom of the press until it's free. Then it costs a lot. Ben, really great to have you on, man. I waited a long time to have you on. Please don't be a stranger in these here parts. Love talking baseball with you. We'll send everybody out to follow you, man.
My pleasure. Thanks.
You got it, Ben Lindbergh, staffer at Ringer. You can find him at Ben Lindbergh, Lindbergh, one of the great young writers, statisticians, and interesting minds. The book is The Only Rule Is It Has to Work. You can check that out as well. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear from wherever you are. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And if you want some inspiration, go to PlanetOfTriumphs.com. We have our own inspiration. We're flying off to Frankfurt, Germany next week to meet the man who saved my wife's life twice. It's going to be a fascinating week, so you'll want to follow along on Facebook and Twitter. I'm going to be doing some deeper writing over the next couple of weeks as sports returns really for football and a baseball pennant race around here. Luke's writing day in and day out at our WNST morning newspaper as well as online. You can follow him at Baltimore Luke as well as at WNST on Twitter. And you can email me anytime, nasty@WNST.net. LinkedIn, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, and serving our video up live now on Facebook Live as well as WNSTV on our YouTube page. You can subscribe and we come to you whenever you're out there and you're banging around the internet. I start to yell wearing my Oriole hat and my Jen Strong poster and probably some Raven shirt of some kind. I'm looking to get a Pearl Jam hat and add that to my collection after my week at Wrigley. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore Sports.